Good afternoon, everybody. Those of you who are here, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to everybody in Streamland. For being with us this afternoon, for those, I think everyone here knows me, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Seth Gordon, and I'm the director of the School of Drama here at the University of Oklahoma. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're here to celebrate the life and the spirit, the call to teaching, the passion for theater, and the passion for people, for her family, and for her students and colleagues of Susan Shaughnessy. Susan taught here at OU's School of Drama from 1993 until 2020. For those 27 years, she served her students in her art form with distinction and great love for the work. As you'll see as various people come to this lectern and speak today, the effect she had on her students and colleagues was immeasurable. I've heard more alumni than I can count tell me of the profound effect she had on their lives. More than a few have said that the way they look at the theater, if not at life altogether, is shaped in large ways by their connection to Susan. Susan's strongest legacies, the parts of her teaching that remain with OU Drama today, include the trips to Italy and to Arezzo in particular, of which she took many. I think of the photos we just saw. At least half were at Norman, Oklahoma, and half were in Arezzo. We still go to Arezzo now. In fact, the next trip is scheduled for next month. Susan was a huge part of these trips, and they remain an important memory for so many students who went here. Perhaps her most enduring contribution to the school is Departures from Realism. I sometimes wonder if that should be the name of the book I write about leading the school during the pandemic. But actually, Departures from Realism is a course that allows students to explore what is boldly theatrical about some of the greatest dramatists of our time. Brecht, Beckett, Adrienne Kennedy, Susan Laurie Parks, Pinter, Ionesco. For many of our students who had been thus far steeped in psychological realism, Departures, as everyone here tends to call it, is a revelation. No one sees theater the same way after taking this course. It opens you up to the truth that in the theater, anything is possible. The imagination is limitless. Rules are meant to be respected and then broken, and that we are all capable of telling any story we find worthy in our own unique and individual way. The work I see from our students amazes me every day. But the work I have seen done in this class is usually the most inventive and flush with the glory of discovery. Since Susan's retirement in 2020, Departures has been taught by 2 alumni who took the course with Susan. Thus, the inspiration that has awakened the creative spirit of so many over the years remains as strong as ever in FAC 317. It is a course that, as far as I know, is unique among BFA drama programs. Susan and I overlapped at OU Drama for just 1 year, but her effect on my experience here thus far was profound all the same. She was warm and welcoming to me, and her passion for the work we do was infectious. I am tremendously grateful to have known her, but this is incomparable to the memories of so many alumni and current students have of her thoughtful teaching and of her grace. It is my hope that the memories shared by those who follow me momentarily, who had the privilege of being touched by her more than I was, can give you even some small indication of who she was and what she meant to so many. And if you knew her well, worked with her, or were taught by her, can provide you with some warmth and solace as we remember her.
That was lovely, Seth. Thank you. And hello to everyone, and hello to those streaming. I'm afraid I may be a little more scattered than Director Gordon was. The thoughts keep rushing in and pouring in, and I keep scribbling on little note cards. And so I'm going to try to distill my thoughts and direct them But I'll begin by saying in 1984, Judy Midget met Susan Uter in Athens, Georgia. And she immediately took me under her wing and proceeded to treat me as her wayward little sister for the next 38 years. We were very different. She was the middle of 5 children. I'm an only child. She was raised in Louisiana society. I was raised, on the farm with some horses. She was the child of a judge who was active in the civil rights movement and very active. I was the child of teachers who raised a few cattle on the side, but somehow we found great friendship that started with our mutual love of theater and then expanded from there. We stayed in touch. We delivered papers at conferences together. We lived all over the country, stayed in touch. That picture that you saw that I said was 1986, that's on the floor in my apartment. We were getting ready to put together a panel for Southeastern Theater Conference. And in 1999, I was living in Wilmington, North Carolina. I'd taken some time off to raise a beautiful, unexpected son. And he was approaching 4, and she called and said, "I think I have a job for you. Don't you think you should better go back to work?" And so I came here, met Marvin Lamb, and I've been here ever since. And we worked together a lot. She directed me twice. She directed me as the professor in Our Town, which starred Ken Kercheval of Dallas fame, and there are a lot of stories there, but they require wine, and so you can hit me up. He had such a tremendous crush on her, I think it took her about 2 or 3 years to really shake him. And right here in this space, she directed me in Arsenic and Old Lace. And that was a combination of faculty and students who did that together. Dr. Koger's husband, Dave Pasto, Dr. Pasto was in it. He played Jonathan. My husband played 2 roles in it. And then lots of students were in it, and it was a great romp. I remember Marvin Lamb saw that production, and I remember you telling me something vaguely complimentary about how good I was at being an old lady, a crazy old lady, or something like that. Anyway, yeah, we had a great time on that show. Susan, all that Seth said, yeah, Susan's had a profound effect on so many people, and I just wanted to talk about her as a person a little bit. She was elegant, always had the proper manners and response to things, and always feigned outrageousness when others did not, outrageous reactions when others did not, but she could be just as bawdy as anybody else, She was a consummate hostess. She threw the best dinners and parties, and she, invited people into her home, and big groups, little groups, it didn't matter. Her home was always wide open, and come celebrate at my house. Devoted mother. So proud of Maggie and Miranda. All their accomplishments, completely devoted. Our kids grew up together, essentially. I taught her daughters how to drive stick shift. And Maggie first, and then Miranda, and she always liked to tell the story that when we came back from Lloyd Noble Center, when I came back with Miranda, she said, "How did it go?" And I said, "You have 2 very different daughters." And she thought that was accurate. So she mentored my son. My son would go help her with projects around the house, and during that time, he gleaned all the wisdom and guidance that came from Auntie Susan. And since I'm an only child and don't have siblings, she truly became his aunt and offered him lots of great life lessons while he was helping her clean out the basement and things like that. She was a devout Catholic and raised in Louisiana in the Catholic Church and attended Mass every single day. And I don't know that I've ever known anybody else in my life who did that. Um, uh, she was an avid gardener. And I used to think, wow, that's such hard work. She said I goes gardening all day. And then I found out that gardening means you call in the professional to take all the old stuff out and till it all up and get the soil worked, and then you just roll your little cart in and plant the pretty things. I didn't know that. I might have taken it up had I figured out how to do that. Um, she didn't get to see her wisteria bloom this year. It bloomed just after she died. But she had the most beautiful wisteria. She loved Italy. She loved flowers. Part of her is going to be in Italy forever. Maggie's going to take a little part of her there and make sure she remains in Italy. While she was home with hospice care, friends and family were sitting around her, and we began to talk about how many countries she had visited. And we came up with 26, and we're not sure we got them all. She was very sharp right to the end. When she came home with hospice, and I came over on that Monday before she died on Friday, and she grabbed my hand and she said, "Have you heard? It's more imminent than we knew." And I said, "Yes, I've heard." And I said, "Frankly, I'm a little pissed off about it." I said, "I'm really mad that we're not going to get to be retired together and have some adventures." And she said, "I got a whole list of things I'm pissed off about." And I said, "Where is this list? I would really like to see it." And she said, and I said, "Just give me one. Just tell me one thing that's on that list." And she looked at me and she said, "New season of Outlander." So, one of the shows that she directed in this space that always comes to mind because it was of Susan's sensibility. It was so much of Susan's heart and soul. It was called Enchanted April. It was adapted by Matthew Barber for the stage, and her daughters asked me to read a little passage from it at her funeral, and if you'll indulge me, I'm going to read it again. It's Susan. To those who appreciate wisteria and sunshine. Not long after that evening, the wisteria at San Salvatore gave way, and, though a loss, the castle now dressed itself in triumphant white. There were white stalks and white pinks and white Banksia roses, syringa and jessamine, and above all, the crowning glory of Mr. Wilding's acacia. A season had passed and would pass again. And what I see now is that, enchantment aside, what had really been handed down that month was a lesson in gardening. Wisteria would return the following April. We all would, in fact. And there would be a wedding. But that first April, we had only just planted our futures. And on our final day, as we reached the bottom of the hill and passed through the castle's gates, a great warm wind blew through and against our backs, as if to blow away our befores forever, now that our afters had begun. And with the wind came all the scents of San Salvatore, the gardens and the sea, cinnamon and macaroni, and dancing among them, white blossoms breaking free, falling like rain. Thank you. Oh, don't applaud.
I'm going to hold it. Hi, streaming. Susan's home on Miller Avenue was a family to all kinds of orphans. She surrounded that home with a force field of prayer. She lost her headphones once, and I asked her how she managed during her daily workouts at the health club. And she says, "I have a rosary app on my phone. I can say 4 while I'm on the treadmill." When I arrived at Susan's in the January of 2020, metaphorically and unwilling to admit to myself, I arrived on a stretcher. Little did I know, God brought out the big guns when he saw that I needed healing. I needed Susan. I felt so at home in her cathedral, surrounded by the voices of angels that lived in the ivy inhabiting the walls of her church. I talked to Levi Hawkins and Audrey Armacost, who lived with Susan and I for periods at a time, and we all agreed that we were inexplicably struck by some creative force while under her care. Inexplicably is not the right word. I'm sure if you pan downstairs at 3 a.m., you would see Susan throwing herbs into a pot that she stirs with a magic wand, singing Andrea Bocelli with a twinkle in her eye. With the subtlety of an alligator, at first slow and quiet, and then not, I'm sorry, I flew back into my body under her care. I started to write music, plays, poetry, most of which I had never done before. I was looking through a journal I kept at our house this morning, and I dreamt of archangels. In one passage I write, "There was a sort of holy poltergeist in the walls. Electricity flowed through every part of the house like veins. I went to touch the socket in the wall with a metal fork, and bursts of blue lightning came out like doves on fire. I fell to my knees like a child. There was so much light. I ran downstairs screaming for Susan, and she said, 'That's the Blue Angel, Archangel Michael. No one's seen him in a long time.' And then she told me not to give him too much attention if I didn't want the lightning to keep happening. Even in my dreams, Susan had this way of letting you know that magic was real and then bopping you on the head to keep you connected to the earth so you didn't float away like a balloon. After all, there are flowers on earth. And wine." When I told her about my dream the next day, she gave me a small, intelligent laugh. It was the laugh of an oracle, as if it hadn't been a dream at all. And then she jumped up from her chair and said, "Archangel Michael, I have his prayer card, although his prayer isn't really a prayer, but more of a rally into battle." When I was exiting St. Thomas More after Susan's funeral mass, littered in the pews were prayer cards. Of absolutely no coincidence, they were from Archangel Michael. Susan and I lived with each other on 2 separate occasions, both of which happened separately and at first glance randomly. At 26 and 28 years old, it wasn't what I had planned, but magic rarely is. We held each other's hands during the pandemic, retirement, and the summer of election year. When I reflect back on it now, I don't know how either of us would have managed if it hadn't been for each other. She nursed my wounds into scars, and I taught her how to create a Zoom invite. She fueled my now insatiable need to garden and taught me how to make a roux. Fast forward to October of last year, we had once again caught wind of each other's siren call, and I walked up to her porch, and I was greeted by the most half-assed jack-o'-lantern I had ever seen. She had drawn this face on it with Sharpie. And I marched into her house, and I was bent over laughing, and I said, "Susan, what's with the pumpkin?" She replied, "Well, I was going to do the whole carving thing for the kids, and then I thought, fuck it." Shoot. Susan is one of the few people I've met over the age of 9 that truly believe in magic. Time has now revealed the reasoning behind our most recent adventure together. She held my hand and taught me how to be a teacher, and I brought her Brahms milkshakes and antibiotics as we struggled to find out why she didn't have the energy to curse in Italian anymore. She was very upset that she no longer held a gold or a silver position in Italian on the Duolingo app. She reserved most of her cursing for the owl, of course, her arch nemesis. Time has now revealed itself. A woman who carried so much for so long is now, finally, weightless. And I honestly believe it's her ideal weight. Susan was born to be an angel. Instead of chats over Outlander and crawfish, Susan now talks to me through wind chimes and sends words of affirmation down on the feather of a bird. I've realized now through massive edits that I could write a novel about our summers together and celebrating our birthdays that were, of course, 3 days apart. So as I start to write the beginning of one story, I leave you with words from another, and I've changed the name to Susan. She walks barefoot into the humid night, moonlight on her freckled shoulders. Near a huge live oak tree on the edge of her father's cotton fields, Susan looks up into the sky. In the crook of the crescent moon sits the Holy Lady, with strong muscles and a merciful heart. She kicks her splendid legs like the moon is her swing and the sky is her front porch. She waves down at us, like she's just spotted an old buddy. Susan stands in the moonlight and lets the Blessed Mother love every hair on her 6-year-old head. Tenderness flows down the moon and up from the earth. For one fleeting, luminous moment, Susan Shaughnessy knows that there has never been a time where she has not been loved. Rebecca Wells, The Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood.
Hello, everyone. My name is Madison Niederhauser. Some of you probably don't know me. I was very glad to get asked to say a few words today, but I think Dr. Pender asked me to speak, and I think it was maybe a tactical misfire because I'm an actor, and you just put me in front of a microphone. So I really hope everybody's comfortable because you're going to be here for a minute. I got to meet Susan when I first came to OU. I was a student in 2008, and I graduated in 2012. And Susan consistently was centered around most of my favorite experiences while I was here. And when I first got to the University of Oklahoma, I was a little afraid of Susan. Not because Susan is scary, but because Susan, for almost her entire career, as far as I can tell, carried a mythos about her. There was something magical and kind of intimidating about Susan Shaughnessy and the way that Susan inhabited Susan's space. And so when I was a freshman, Susan was also one of the first people to kind of, quote, give me my big break. I said that as an 18-year-old. And I got to work with Susan early in my career doing a production of Antigone in Oklahoma City, and I played the messenger. You're right, that's the messenger. And my whole job was to run on stage in a panic, sweating profusely, and say, everything's really bad out there, and then run away. I was great. But it was my first opportunity to work with Susan, and I was so excited to get to do it. It felt like it was sort of the beginning of something special for me. And just being in the room with Susan was tremendous. And there were a series of days that I found myself sort of pulling away, right? Fading into the background and kind of staying quiet and not engaging so much. And I think it's fair to say retrospectively that around that time, when I was about 18 or 19 years old, I was not particularly close to my family. And so OU and Susan specifically sort of became de facto family for me, my found family, as we would call it. And I found myself begrudging getting to go back home, right? I wanted to stay, and I wanted to continue working with Susan and working with everybody that was here. And Susan started to catch on to this and could tell that something was going on. And so after a few days of me being funky, Susan asked me to stick around for a few minutes after rehearsal. And of course, I immediately peed my pants because the intimidating Susan Shaughnessy wanted to talk to me and only me after rehearsal. So I stuck around, and everybody filtered out, and she sat me down, and she looked me in the eye, and she said, something's going on. And I said, yeah, something's going on. I don't really want to go home. I just want to stay here. And she looked at me and asked me why, and I kind of explained the situation and how it was complicated. And she thought for a while, and she looked at me and she said, "Well, I don't think I can fix that, but I can feed you." And she did, and she invited me over for dinner, and to say that she was an entertainer is an understatement of immense value. And the reason that moment stands with me all of these years later is because I think it's very telling about who Susan was, is that Susan's immediate response was not to fix me. Susan's goal was not to make me right again. Susan's goal was to ask me how I was doing, see where I was, and just sit with me through it. And I think that has probably been true for most of the people in this room at any given time in your journey with Susan. And there's a phrase that we echo in the School of Drama all the time, even now, even 10 plus years later from when I was here in undergrad, that Susan herself also echoed. We say, feed your soul all the time. Take care of your human. Feed your soul. And it occurs to me that Susan fed all of our souls. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this room right now. She also fed us and our bodies, too, and that was great. But she also fed our souls. And in being back here, I find myself in an odd predicament, a wonderful predicament, that I'm also teaching the classes now that Susan taught me when I was here 10 years ago. And even though I am here and Susan is not, she is still very much in the air of this place. Her essence is literally everywhere, every day. And I think that that's really lovely because as far as I can tell, that means that everyone who comes through this program, whether they've met Susan or not, because Susan lived a life that was not about herself, but was about everyone that might ever need her, she lives on in a way that I think she might not even have understood, the gravity of which I think she might not have understood. And so in that vein, I think that everyone who matriculates through this place will inherit Susan. And I think Susan has left us with quite a bit of inheritance. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sarah Helsley. I graduated in 2018 with a degree in dramaturgy. So forgive me if I go off on a tangent. I am a trained dramaturg, so my whole thing is giving background and context. Before I officially get started, I want to share, sorry, I'm about to lose it, a memory I have of Susan from last summer. She invited me to her home to have dinner, and this is such a silly story. I was wearing this t-shirt, and on the front it was blank, and then on the back it had these words on it, and she couldn't see what it said, so she asked me what my shirt said, and I said, I turned around to show her, and on the back it read, "If Sonny Corleone had Easy Pass, he'd be playing bocce ball today." And I've never seen Susan laugh harder in my life. And I just wanted to share that story with you because I just thought it was so silly and so funny and so Susan. So I first met Susan 6 years ago in the spring of 2016. Abby Schmitz and I had been assigned as dramaturgs on Vinegar Tom, which Susan was going to be directing in November. We went in to have a meeting with her, and as Madison said, I hadn't met Susan yet, and I was terrified because she did have this whole energy, I am Susan, and I am, this is who I am. And I also knew that she had very high expectations of her students because she believed in us in a way that I think you don't experience very often. Anyway, if you're not familiar with Vinegar Tom, it's a play about the witch trials that took place in 17th century England, punctuated by performances of modern music that reflect on the contemporary struggle for gender equality. And that's meant to illustrate just how far we have not come. As I said, I am a dramaturg. It's a piece of epic theater inspired by the work of Bertolt Brecht that Churchill wrote for the leftist feminist theater collective Monstrous Regiment, the company's name itself a reference to the European witch hunts during the early modern period. And as many of you probably remember, there was an election in 2016, and rehearsals for Vinegar Tom coincided with the final months of the campaign. That was actually the very first presidential election I was able to vote in, so it was a big deal for me, and an especially big deal to work on this production that tied so much to these issues that we are obviously still facing today. An election day that year actually took place during Tech Week, and I'll never really forget the energy in the room on that night. It was very fraught with this mix of excitement and anxiety about the results, which were pouring in all over the United States. Those of us who were not on stage rehearsing were just constantly refreshing our phones and our Twitter feeds. And we were watching this, our spirits were rising and falling, and we watched this red and blue line surge back and forth like a game of tug-of-war whose winner would decide which of us were worthy of basic human dignity. Rehearsal ended before all votes were counted, and as we walked out of the theater, a cloud of uncertainty hung over all of us. I doubt most of us slept well that night. I know I certainly didn't. And the next day, rehearsal was very somber. It felt as though we were in mourning, in a way, for a new kind of future that felt within our grasp that we didn't get to see. But despite the disappointment and fear, we carried on. Instead of taking that political loss as a signal to give up, we used it as fuel to infuse the production with righteous anger and a promise to continue to fight inequality. And there was so much to love about that production. It was a magnificent cast and wonderful original music and a special kind of camaraderie that you don't really find unless you're working on a project where everybody really is fully committed and all in to what that project means. But my favorite part was the way we channeled our fury into a positive community action through hosting a supply drive for the Women's Resource Center, definitely drawing from, Brecht and Carol Churchill's own, political stances and aspirations, which Susan taught us so much about. And I debated with myself whether I should mention politics, as I just did, but I realized that to hold my tongue about that element of my relationship with Susan would be a disservice to her memory, because so much of her life was meant fighting for people who weren't able to fight for themselves. And I'm sorry. I think about Susan every day, every time I read the news. Lately, we've seen this wave of unionization efforts sweeping across our nation. And I think about this book of poetry that Susan gave me by Bertolt Brecht, and it's this beautiful bilingual edition, and I think about her. And I've certainly been thinking about her in this last week as we've been getting some blows to our civil rights, attacking those of us of marginalized genders, denying us our autonomy. And I even think about her when I roll my recycling bin out to the curb because she tried so hard. She wanted to create this world that was beautiful and special and would be so forever, for even after she's long gone, and how she would just be adamant about making sure everything that could be recycled got into that bin and had a chance at a new life and keeping this world beautiful. She was a tough, brilliant, headstrong woman and someone who would always boldly advocate for herself and the people she loved. Shortly after Susan retired, she recruited me to help her clear out her office and her home. And she paid me for my time, but honestly, I would have done it for free just for the chance to explore her house and its stories. As you all know, Susan lived in a beautiful house built over 100 years ago, with a speakeasy in the basement and a fireplace decorated with gorgeous painted tile and fragments of life from every corner of the world on display, a mix of treasures from Susan's own travels as well as her family's. If I thought I could ever afford to own a home, I'd want a house just like Susan's. As we worked together to clear out decades worth of playbills, birthday cards, souvenirs, half-empty journals, and enough books even to make this bibliophile's head spin, Susan kindly offered me many unique and beautiful knickknacks, pieces of art, and books that now live in my home. I carefully placed these items in places of prominence, imagining my own future travels and collections I would curate someday, and thinking of Susan every time I look at them. Susan loved to travel, especially to Italy. And I was lucky enough in 2017 to get the chance to travel with her, to take a class, Shakespeare in Italy. It was a life-changing experience, and even more so because I got to go with Susan. And one of the things I really learned during that was how much Susan not just loved art, but had just like this deep knowledge of it. And it wasn't until we started actually visiting the museums and the churches and the galleries that she would just, pull these facts out of her pocket. Like, it's just like, oh, by the way, Giotto, blah, 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 blah. Oh, by the way, blah, blah, blah. And it was anything from ancient Roman art to, medieval paintings in churches to experimental performance art, and she just always had something to say, something to share, some fact. And I just was so in awe of that, not only because, she had this deep knowledge, but because she managed to keep a sense of awe with her as well. I think a lot of times when people become very knowledgeable, they lose their sense of wonder, and that was never true of Susan. She had this duality where she could balance, knowledge and, this like confident knowledge in the core of her being with this amazement at the beauty of the world. And it's something that just always struck me about her. And I think that duality speaks to the artist in Susan's heart, and that is inspired largely by her faith. Her Catholicism was deeply important to her, and it seeped into her everyday life in lovely, often quiet ways. She held intimate superstitions, like the way she wouldn't let photos rest face down, or her habit of crossing herself when she passed a Catholic church. She was thrilled by the sumptuous, yet moved by the humble. Perhaps no anecdote illustrates this better than the day we spent in Siena in our travels to Italy. While my classmates and I were taken on a tour of the city, Susan went alone to see St. Catherine of Siena's living quarters, a small, modest space where St. Catherine spent her days in prayer and fasting. When we reunited with Susan later in the day, she told me about her experience in a low, reverent voice, tears welling in her eyes even hours after her visit. St. Catherine's devotion and humility clearly struck something deep within Susan's heart, and while I have yet to return to Siena to visit St. Catherine's living quarters myself, I hope to travel there someday to light a candle in Susan's honor.
Susan Shaughnessy is a force of life who we all were lucky to have known. She tended to everything in her own reality as a garden, and she knew exactly who she was. Strong, kind, honest, poised, and intelligent. Like other students before me, Susan welcomed me into her home when I was 20 years old and I had nowhere else to go. It's difficult to reflect on her life without remembering her home and remembering the physical manifestation of who she was through the beautiful art and pieces that she had scattered throughout, and the garden that she looked after. I wish that I would have heard more stories. It's safe to say that Susan and I were very different people, and even still, she extended her hand to me when no one else would. Even after moving away from her home because of the pandemic, she still made it seemingly possible to drop off the absolute best dishes that I ever had for every holiday to my roommates and I. Aside from living with her, I was even doubly lucky to be her student. Susan deeply understood theater, and she knew what the impact of fine work was. The work always brought us together. One afternoon when I was in the dining room after getting a call from a family member that left me in tears, Susan sat me down and she gave me a bowl of red beans and rice, a staple of her home. And she let me calm down and she gave me a glass of water and we sat in silence as I ate. And after silence and after I sort of like came back into my body, she leaned across the table at me and she said, "Now some of these habits we got rid of during Hope and Gravity are starting to come back." And the easiest way for us to relate was in the work. To ease my mind and to ground me, she talked with me about class, and she gave me extra notes that I was lucky to get. She taught me that living in the moment that I'm in is the best way to live. At my worst, I feel I enter situations with an idea of how things should be, and Susan explained to me through work and through life that the best way to show up is with a paintbrush rather than with some half-assed painting that we think is worth showing to other people. She showed me that we should come with our paintbrushes in hand, with the tools and the experiences that we have, in the colors of our own lives and wait for the colors and the brushes of other people so that we can figure out what it is that we're doing on this canvas and on the stages that we share. Susan's colors will live on in a beautiful way. I'd like to share a poem from a play called Hope and Gravity that Susan directed me in her last year of teaching. In the play, as a preface, which I just think is a beautiful tidbit, the playwright says that the poem isn't quite finished yet. Beneath the brown lawn, grizzled, winter-worn, under the naked dogwood, beneath the birdhouse, vacant since September, lies a bulb, Tulipa tarda, hidden like a promissory note, a spring remembrance waiting for redemption. Thank you.
Pretty long time ago, soon after I first met Susan, she asked me if I'd ever had any thought of going into theater. And I said no. And she said, why? And I said, because I'm terrified of speaking, so here I am. Okay. Terrified of using the voice instead of the body, and so here I am. I first saw Susan when she came to OU for her interview, because I've been here almost longer than God. And she had a ponytail, a kind of long ponytail, and a navy blue suit, and a navy blue pantsuit, and a light blue blouse. She looked so cute. She just looked so darn cute, and I'd never been able to look cute in my whole life. And she looked so cute, and it took me about 2.5 minutes to realize there was a lot more there than cute, because I got to speak with her for a few minutes at the end of the talk that she gave, and was challenged in a delightful way, and I thought, a delightful, articulate, intelligent way. Almost every time I said something, not at all in a belittling way, she brought up a counterpoint that made me rethink. But it was done with such grace and dignity that who could mind? And I think it was the same grace and dignity that years later, we didn't ever make a point of this because neither of us wanted to know, but my niece was in the School of Drama, Kat. And Susan called me up one afternoon, and she said, hi, this is Susan. You could recognize that voice immediately, right? And I said, hi, what's going on? And she said, she's you. And I said, what? I'm thinking this isn't a compliment. What do you mean, she's me? And she said, Kat, she's you. And I said, no, she's 6 feet tall, and she's this big around, and she's beautiful. She is definitely not me. And anyhow, Susan went into some things about tenacity, sometimes called perseverance, sometimes called stubbornness, sometimes called pig-headedness, that made her think of me. All right, and so I suppose in that way maybe she was, but at the end of our conversation, I said, Susan, I think she's really you. And she said, you know, she might be. She might be her. Hearing the students of Susan's that have spoken this afternoon is almost like walking through the green room at different points when they would be having classes with her or rehearsals with her, or the few times that she invited me to her class because she thought something really cool was going on. And I wish there was like a two-way glass so I could see and no one would know that somebody, the dean, was watching. But the conversation that ensued in those classes was so invigorating and so thought-provoking and so equal. There was no one asking anyone anything. There was just discussion and thought sharing and feeling sharing and opinion sharing. And I found it so stimulating, and I wanted to do my very best to emulate her approach when I talk to students. I'm not certain that I ever quite did, but I hope I made some progress anyway. Judy said her thoughts were a little scattered. Mine are diced. Okay, I started on my computer to write things out. I've been thinking about this ever since Seth asked me if I would say a few words this afternoon. It's not this entire book, don't worry. But I started on the computer and I was trying to type and organize my thoughts and failing miserably. And so I decided I would write them on like every fourth line in a book so I could fill in. And so that's what I've done. So my thoughts are a little bit diced because Susan was damned hard to pin down in some ways. You know, she was ephemeral and ethereal and incredibly intelligent and articulate and talented and giving and loving and devoted, especially devoted to her students and her church and to the theater and to her family, who, bless those young women's hearts, called me every day and let me know what was going on, along with Judy, in the last week or so. And so I felt inestimably fortunate to have known Susan and to have kind of sometimes been a fly on the wall, because students wouldn't really notice when you were walking through the green room or walking by the door or walking by the classroom. And I got to enjoy hearing what I heard about her and wanting even more to emulate her. Her daughters were in the Nutcracker one year, maybe two. I think maybe Miranda was in twice. They were soldiers in the Nutcracker, and Susan's fervent hope was that she would not be a stage mom, especially a ballet stage mom. But almost every rehearsal, she would come up and pick Maggie or Miranda up from rehearsal, and I'd see her outside the studio, and she'd say, "I'm not being a stage mom, I'm just picking them up." And so about the fifth time that happened, I said, "Susan, I know. It's okay. It's all right. I know you're here just picking them up, and they're doing really well." And she said, "You don't have to say that." But they were doing really well. They were very attentive, and they were having the time of their lives, maybe because they didn't love to speak publicly. I don't know. They were marching, and I think they were having a ball. But it was a delight to watch Susan trying not to be a stage mom. Anyone who can inspire students the way Susan has and inspire friendship the way she has is an incredibly special woman and special spirit among us. She was highly principled. Her daughters told me she demonstrated in the 70s. I was not one bit surprised. They said she demonstrated over a variety of causes, but in the past year, I've particularly and personally appreciated how very principled she was when she shared some deeply felt thoughts about students and about teaching and about the school and about how we interact with and support one another, or forget to, perhaps, from time to time, but how we pick it right up again with the grace of God and with the grace of each other, holding all of us up. And so when I spoke with Susan, it was always informal after that first time with the ponytail and the navy blue pantsuit. And often it was out in the parking lot across the street, or it was at Sprouts in the parking lot. I always was anxious to see what she was buying because I knew she was making something much better than I was. And so I would ask her about that. So we had great conversations at Sprouts and in the Fine Arts Center and in the theater lobby before and after performances. And I always appreciated so much the eclecticism of her work and how she was unafraid, or appeared to be unafraid at least, very convincingly, to jump into any project. Feet first, jumped right in, engulfed the whole thing, including the text, including the subtext, including the history, surrounding the time, including the students, and including the challenges, and including all of the design that went with each production. And it was such a lovely pleasure to talk with her about it at the theater before or after the performance. Susan could not be pigeonholed, you know? I can't imagine anyone coming up with 4 words to describe Susan Shaughnessy. There's a whole language, and it probably still isn't enough. And I will always be sorry that I don't think I got to talk to her enough. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. As Seth mentioned, Susan came to OU in 1993, so I worked with her for 27 years, from 1993 until the year that we both retired in 2020. During those 27 years, we shared so much besides our work. We celebrated birthdays, we celebrated weddings, we laughed at ourselves and even at some of our colleagues. We mourned the victims of the Oklahoma City bombing and 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina. We occasionally disagreed, but had love and respect for each other all the time. I've got enough stories like Chandler to fill a book about Susan. But today I'd tell you about the first show we collaborated on, the students we worked with, and some of the things that they've written about her last couple of months. The play was A Piece of My Heart by Shirley Lauro, an adaptation of a book of first-hand accounts of women who served in the Vietnam War. Among the characters were nurses, a USO performer, a volunteer who served coffee and donuts to soldiers. And because Susan and I had both grown up in the 1960s and remembered the war vividly, the play was very personal to us. We were moved by the courage of the women of our generation who had served in the military or as civilians, and the play made a strong feminist statement. As you know, Susan was a great director. She created a powerful ensemble of young actors, 6 women and 1 man. She was a generous collaborator, and as a dramaturg, I loved sharing my research with the students, telling them about what American life was like for people their age in the 1960s. On a set designed by Marie Cloud, Susan's dynamic staging here brought the action to life. The actors dug deep and created memorable characters that have stuck with me for nearly 30 years. They wore costumes designed by Leanne Metzger and performed under lights designed by Kent Fleming. We dedicated the production to women veterans of the Vietnam War and performed it during November, around Veterans Day. The cast and crew revived the show for the American College Theater Festival, where Susan received the Director's Choice Award for the production. Among the cast were students who went on to personal and professional success, both in and outside the theater. Inda Jo Jones Conway was a postgraduate student who played Martha. She now teaches speech and drama and stagecraft at Chandler High School and directs for the Lincoln County Onstage, Oklahoma Onstage. Mallory Beth Swales, a great singer as well as an actor, played Mary Jo, the USO performer. She runs her own business and does voiceover work. Kathleen Early played Sissy. Kathleen went on to star in the original off-Broadway production of Edward Albee's The Play About the Baby. She also is a voice actor and is the mother of 2 boys. Sarah Gray Johnson Soroichin played Whitney. After graduating from OU, she went to nursing school, and now she's an operating room nurse with 2 teenagers. Krista Kimlicko Jones played Leanne. She was nominated for the Irene Ryan Scholarship Competition at ACTF and eventually won the Kennedy Center Award for the Best Actor that year. After graduation, she moved to New York with her husband and founded Theater East, and she acts and teaches acting and voice at the Stella Adler Studio in New York. Maunda Jackson Oyen played Steele. She lives in LA, where she works as an actor, a comedian, a writer, and a personal trainer. And Jeremy Jackson, not related to Maunda, played all the female roles, all the different men that the women encountered in the play. He too lives in California, where he acts and teaches. You may have seen him on the Disney series Lab Rats, or heard him on the video game Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. He's married and has 2 sons. Now, I can't go so far as to say that performing in one play directed by Susan made these people successful, but she had a tremendous influence on their lives as artists and human beings. Kathleen Early wrote, "She's such a part of so many people's stories of how and why we are who we are today. She's a gift, and she shared that with us. She's one of my examples of a strong, brilliant, beautiful woman." Sarah Sorokin said, "She was a lovely woman inside and out. She was a wonderful teacher and an intuitive and positive director. She was funny. Her smile was very warm. What immediately comes to mind is how much she loved her kids and how motherly she was toward her students. She opened her home and herself to us, and I only really appreciate this fully as a mom." Krista Jones wrote to Susan before she died, "I want you to know that you were absolutely pivotal in my growth as an artist, as a woman, as a teacher. You helped me see the kind of woman I could grow to be. You helped me find my voice. You gave me opportunities that no one else had and challenged me in ways I didn't even know I needed. I found my truth, my core, and my center." Beth Swales wrote, "She was consistently gracious and giving of her time with us. She was consistently supportive. She was teaching us something new. She showed up and then some. She was an amazing professor, director, mentor, and friend." I think Beth speaks for me and for all of us when she writes, "She will always have a piece of my heart."
I want to thank everybody who shared their memories about Susan this afternoon. I mentioned at the beginning that I did not know her quite as long as others who spoke, but I do feel like her grace and her humor were captured quite beautifully, and I know that I will never watch another episode of Outlander quite the same way again. I want to tell a brief story about my brother. My brother is a violinist. He's also an orchestra conductor. Our joke is that we do the same thing. We're in the same profession, except he gets to stand in front of the cast and tell them exactly how to do it and give them notes during the performance. And that's the big difference between what he does and what I do. But as a violinist, when he was a child, he was given a tutorial by an elderly man who was in either his 80s or his 90s, on a piece by Chopin. And this elderly man had been taught the piece by Chopin when he was a young boy by a very, very elderly man who had been taught the piece when he was a young boy by Chopin. And I tell that story because as I watch Madison speak this afternoon, I know that as long as we have departures at this school, and I don't anticipate we will ever not have departures at this school, Susan will be a part of the heart and soul of this school. This is For the Living, and we are all here this afternoon. Many of us have not spoken to each other in a really long time, and so we want this to continue. We have snacks and stuff to drink in the lobby of the bracket, so I hope that momentarily you'll all walk over to the bracket and spend a little bit more time together. We don't have wine, but perhaps Judy will regale us with a couple of more stories. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon.
Do you think I'll get Wi-Fi to call? I don't know what to do. We're about to find out. Let's try a video. Oh, not Dr. Pender. Sorry. Da, 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 da. I don't know what to do. She'll pop up. She'll pop up. Maybe I'll try calling. Sorry, Miranda. I know she's watching.
I'm watching you.
I'm sorry. You're.
Hold on. Let me take you up. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I closed the feed, so I can't see you, and you guys can't see me. But if you make a noise, I may be able to hear you and know that you're there, and I'm not speaking into the abyss. I don't want to, damn, I'm on the highway in rural Mississippi. You know,
Judy says pull over.
there's a gas station up here, I'm gonna pull over. Just hold on. For a few weeks now, I've been driving home, from work. And this was always the time of day that I would call my mom, and I would generally bitch about whatever heinous client I had. For those of you that don't know, I'm a lawyer, and I don't know why I did that, but I did. But I would call her, and most days I feel like I don't know what's going on or what just happened. But this is the one thing that I know. We knew that something was wrong. And I knew that we didn't have much time. But in the last week that I got to spend with my mom when we were on hospice, and okay, now I've pulled over, so we're good. I don't have to cry and drive. I didn't mean to cry, but here I am. In that last week, we had hundreds of text messages from students that Judy dutifully read to my mom, that Chandler read to my mom. We had visitors and family and friends. And I don't think that if I had paid God to give my mom a better ending, that he could have. I used to be, I grew up, the drama department was like home to me. I grew up riding my scooter, the terrible razor scooters that would break your ankles if you weren't careful. I grew up riding that scooter in the halls, all over room 317. My dad built a lot of the set props that you guys have in those classrooms. And I used to be so jealous of her students. I'd get home from school and mom would have to go to rehearsal. I used to be so jealous that you guys got to have her and I didn't. And I hate that it took me until the moment that she died to realize that what I had was hundreds of brothers and sisters that my mom shared us with. And I'm so grateful for all of you. I remember Madison and Antigone. I remember Chandler with a cat puppet on her arm in a play. I can't remember, by the Bog of Cats or something, I don't know. I remember all of these names. And I remember all of you, even if I don't know you personally. I know of you because of how my mom talked about you. And I don't want you to think for a second that she didn't love and remember every single one of you. I do want you to know that my mom was every bit of the activist that you have made her out to be. hero. I don't think this will come to as a surprise to me, and she'd probably hate that I told you this, but she had an afro. I do have a photo of it. I'll find it. But mom had an afro, and she, she led protests and sit-ins and boycotts for civil rights against the Vietnam War, for gender equality. And so if there's anything that you guys can do that would be in her name, it would be to go forward with your lives with the courage and bravery that she taught you to live with. And I hope that any of us can be half as brave as she was, because I never saw her cry. Up until the very end, she never cried. Even in the face of death, she was so loved. And I'm so eternally grateful to all of you. And I just want you guys to know that. So I'm going to drive home and stop crying, because I'll probably hit a squirrel or something. But I love you all so much, and I hope we stay in touch, okay?
We love you too.
Sorry, Susan.
They love
Bye.
you. Bye, honey.